The catastrophic strategic failures of the mid-war period, most notably the disaster at Stalingrad, had forced the German High Command into a fundamentally defensive posture, where the reliance on technological superiority was rapidly dwindling. By late 1944, the Western Front had devolved into a constant, grinding battle of attrition, where every Allied tank represented a new and urgent threat to the Reich. The most potent German defense remained the legendary 8.8 mm flak pack gun, the formidable 88. Trained to be masters of anti-tank warfare, these specialized crews were accustomed to rapid identification and confident destruction of all standard Allied armor. They knew the M4 Sherman was a medium tank, easily defeated from great distances. Their tactical confidence was absolute, but their critical intelligence regarding the Allies' latest, specialized developments was dangerously non-existent, setting the stage for a series of lethal and demoralizing surprises on the battlefield. The United States Army, in preparing for the brutally difficult task of breaking out from the confined Normandy bocage and tackling the heavily fortified, layered German defenses along the Western Front, urgently recognized the critical need for a new, heavily protected spearhead vehicle. The standard M4 Sherman tank, with its thin, vulnerable armor, was proving tragically susceptible to German anti-tank fire, particularly the dreaded 80 mm. The result of this urgent requirement was the development of the highly specialized M4A3E2 Sherman, quickly nicknamed the Jumbo by the troops. This new tank was not intended for mass production, but was conceived strictly as a specialized assault vehicle, with only 254 units built, designed specifically to lead armored columns and absorb the devastating first shots of an ambush, thus maximizing the survival rate of the main, less protected force following behind. The core and defining difference between the standard M4 Sherman and the M4A3E2 Jumbo was the massive, focused increase in armor protection, which fundamentally changed its entire combat profile and survivability. The standard M4 Sherman had a maximum frontal glacis armor plate thickness of about 2 inches, 51 mm. The Jumbo, however, was a radical departure. It was fitted with a large, additional weld-on armor plate over the original glacis, effectively doubling the thickness, and featured significantly thicker armor everywhere else on the hull. The combined effect of the base armor and the add-on plate resulted in an official flat frontal hull thickness of approximately 4 inches, 110 mm. This 4-inch armor on the hull was just the starting point of the Jumbo S formidable protection. Furthermore, because the frontal glacis plate was sloped, the effective thickness of the frontal hull armor, the amount of armor the projectile had to pass through, could easily reach and surpass 5.5 inches, 140 mm in certain crucial zones, a level of protection previously only seen on true heavy tanks, never on a tank bearing the Sherman name. This increase in thickness was crucial for surviving the initial impact of a standard 75 mm or even a high-explosive 88 mm round, making the Jumbo an entirely different class of target than its visually similar predecessor. The most extreme and impressive protection on the M4A3E2 was found on its newly designed massive cast turret. This turret replaced the standard, smaller Sherman turret entirely and featured an effective front thickness around the critical gun mantlet area that often measured up to a staggering 7 inches, 178 meters. This area, which is the traditional point of aim in tank-to-tank duels, suddenly offered protection, rivaling the heaviest German tanks, such as the feared Tiger the Fun and Tiger II. The combined effect of the heavily sloped frontal glacis and the incredibly thick cast turret meant that, in optimal impact zones, the Jumbo could achieve an effective line-of-sight thickness that could indeed reach or even exceed 190 mm, so 7 inches. The formidable German 88 mm anti-tank gun was, without question, the single best and most effective anti-tank weapon deployed by any nation during the entire war. Its skilled crews were trained to confidently engage and destroy any known Allied tank. Their tactical doctrine was rooted entirely in generalized knowledge of Allied armor. They were trained to instantly recognize the silhouette of an M4 Sherman as a medium tank with light armor, knowing that a modern armor-piercing capped ballistic cap, APCBC, round from the 80mm, would penetrate it easily from virtually any angle, often from a staggering distance of up to 2,000 meters. The established German doctrine guaranteed a high probability kill against the M4, and this expectation was a crucial, deeply ingrained part of the crew's operational psychology and confidence. The critical problem for these highly experienced German gun crews was that they received no specific, actionable intelligence or training on the existence or specific characteristics of the M4A3E2 jumbo. As a very low-production, specialized vehicle that was rushed into service with the invasion forces, detailed intelligence on its specific, radically altered armor profile was extremely slow to collect, fragmented, and often critically failed to filter down through the disorganized, late-war German command structure to the forward-deployed anti-tank crews who desperately needed it most. The information often got fatally stuck at high levels of divisional or corps intelligence, never reaching the NCOs and gunners manning the forward anti-tank positions, leaving them strategically and tactically blind to the new specialized threat. A key reason the German crews were so consistently caught by surprise was the subtle visual similarity of the jumbo to the standard M4 Sherman. From the typical combat distance, the M4A3E2 retained the familiar general silhouette of the standard M4 Sherman hull and chassis, while the jumbo did feature subtle visual differences, such as the chunkier track covers, wider tracks, and the massive, distinct cast turret. These crucial changes were often not discernible, recognizable, or prioritized under the intense stress of combat, in low visibility, or at the long engagement ranges preferred by the 88mm. The crew's well-established mental model was instantly triggered by the familiar Sherman shape, leading them to incorrectly assume the enemy tank had the same weak armor as its ubiquitous brethren. This confusion was fatally compounded by a complete systemic intelligence failure within the German reporting chain by late 1944. The Abwehr, military intelligence, was in utter disarray, and new Allied equipment reports were slow, incomplete, and generally ineffective due to Allied air superiority and the chaos of the retreat. When a new threat was identified, the detailed reports often failed to reach the soldiers on the front lines in a timely or coherent manner. The tactical surprise achieved by the jumbo was therefore a systemic failure of the entire German intelligence and training apparatus, compounded by the tank's scarcity. The gunners' confusion was not due to a lack of individual skill or bravery, but tragically due to a complete lack of current, critical information about their adversary. German anti-tank doctrine, especially when employing the powerful 88mm gun, prioritized immediate, decisive destruction of the target. A crew, seeing the standard Sherman silhouette approach, would instinctively target the center mass of the frontal glacis plate, fully expecting an instant, catastrophic, and fiery kill. When a crew first engaged a jumbo and fired, they observed the expected penetration fail, often resulting in the round simply glancing off, or, in a much more alarming scenario, fracturing harmlessly on the thick armor. Their immediate, deeply conditioned reaction was rarely to question the entire strategic model. Instead, they likely assumed a faulty round, an unreliable fuse, or a lucky, improbable ricochet, rather than instantly updating their mental model to include a new, heavily armored variant. The first few encounters between the formidable 80mm and the surprisingly resilient jumbo must have been a moment of profound tactical and psychological shock for the German gun crews. A non-penetration from an 80mm anti-tank round against a tank perceived to be a Sherman silhouette was virtually unheard of, and would have been completely contrary to years of successful operational experience against Allied armor. This initial, profound disbelief at the lack of the expected kill shot against the main frontal plate was a highly significant moment of psychological vulnerability on the battlefield, causing hesitation where ruthlessness was required. The inevitable initial reaction of the German crews, following the non-penetration, would have been characterized by profound confusion, disbelief, and mounting frustration. They likely wasted crucial seconds, or even minutes, firing multiple desperate follow-up shots at the very same invulnerable spot on the frontal glacis, believing they could correct the unexpected failure through sheer force. Alternatively, they might quickly and correctly aim for the traditionally weaker spots, such as the track assembly, the hull side, or the commander's cupola. However, the critical momentary delay and confusion caused by the shock of the frontal armor-S resilience gave the Spearhead jumbo vehicle the precious time it needed to locate and eliminate the German anti-tank position, confirming that the German crews were tragically tactically ignorant of the true, heavy-hitting threat they faced. The failure to penetrate the jumbo with the first confident shot often led to a rapid sequence of events that proved fatal for the German gun crew. The jumbo, designed to absorb that very first hit, would then bring its own 75mm or 76mm main gun to bear. If the 88mm crew had to spend crucial time re-aiming for a smaller, less reliable target, like the turret ring, the advantage of the surprise ambush was lost. The psychological blow of seeing their most potent weapon fail was often enough to degrade the crew's performance, leading to missed follow-up shots and allowing the jumbo to return fire and clear the threat, thus successfully executing its mission as a protective spearhead. The low production number of the M4A3E2, only 254 units, paradoxically worked in the Allies' favor by aiding operational security. The scarcity meant that no single German corps or army would encounter the tank frequently enough to build a reliable, confirmed threat profile. Encounters were sporadic and localized, often resulting in the entire German anti-tank position being destroyed before any valuable information could be reliably relayed back up the chain of command. This prevented the necessary volume of sightings and intelligence that would have otherwise triggered a high-priority alert and the immediate dissemination of countermeasures to the front lines. Even when a surviving German gun crew did report the presence of a new, heavily armored Sherman variant, the intelligence was often met with skepticism or simply categorized as an unusual, isolated battlefield occurrence. German analysts were already grappling with the influx of various M4 Sherman modifications, and the idea that the Americans would create a tank with near-Tiger levels of protection while retaining the basic Sherman form was considered unlikely. This internal bias and a general distrust of battlefield reports that contradicted established intelligence meant that the reports of the unkillable Sherman were often dismissed as exaggerations, ricochets, or simply lucky hits. The continued Allied aerial dominance over the Western Front played a critical, often overlooked role in maintaining the secrecy of the jumbo. German reconnaissance aircraft could not safely or reliably conduct aerial photography or close observation of forward maintenance areas and train movements in England or France. The relentless Allied fighter bombers ensured that any German unit moving or attempting to observe Allied formations did so under constant threat, further fragmenting their intelligence gathering and preventing the assembly of a coherent photographic picture of the new vehicle's characteristics and deployment. The deployment of the jumbo was carefully timed to coincide with major offensive operations, such as the Battle of the Bulge and the subsequent Rhineland offensives. During these fluid, high-intensity periods, German units were often fighting for their lives and were constantly shifting positions. The chaos of these major battles naturally obscured and minimized the strategic importance of the handful of new tanks they encountered. For a German crew fighting desperately near Bastogne or in the Hurtgen forest, The failure to penetrate a single tank was merely one of many urgent, life-threatening problems, not a high-priority intelligence concern. The most vulnerable point of the jumbo, the drive sprocket and the track assembly, remained susceptible to the 80 mm. A highly skilled crew, trained to aim at the track to immobilize the tank, could still achieve a mobility kill. However, this required highly precise aiming under pressure, a task made exponentially more difficult by the psychological shock of the initial frontal non-penetration. The loss of confidence meant that the German crews were often too rattled to switch quickly and effectively to the less obvious targeting strategy required to defeat the jumbo. The realization of the M4A3E2's true nature likely occurred first at the Army group level of the Wehrmacht, where reports of unusually high survival rates for certain Sherman variants began to correlate. However, even when the truth was established, the organizational paralysis within the German army meant that translating this high-level intelligence into new, revised targeting diagrams and operational directives for the thousands of anti-tank crews on the front line was a slow, bureaucratically nightmarish process that often took months, by which time the tactical situation had already decisively shifted. The successful deployment of the jumbo perfectly exploited the systemic weaknesses of the late-war Wehrmacht. The tank capitalized on Hitler's rigid command structure, which failed to delegate tactical intelligence authority, and the organizational chaos, which prevented the quick dissemination of new threat information. The few 254 jumbos punched far above their weight, not through overwhelming numbers, but by successfully breaking the fundamental psychological certainty of the German anti-tank crews, forcing hesitation and doubt in situations where swift, decisive action was mandatory for survival. The psychological impact of the jumbo's resilience cannot be overstated. For the German anti-tank soldier, the 80 mm was their great equalizer, a technological certainty that gave them an edge against the overwhelming numbers of Allied armor. Seeing their most potent round, fired from a perfect ambush position, fail to penetrate a tank they recognized as a Sherman, created deep tactical demoralization. It was a visible sign that the Allies were still innovating, still escalating, and that the German technological edge, the last pillar of their hope, was rapidly eroding. The design philosophy behind the jumbo also highlighted the Allied industrial advantage. The Americans did not need to design a complex, entirely new heavy tank. They simply added and welded more steel onto an existing, mass-produced chassis. This ability to create a specialized, highly effective variant with minimal disruption to the production line contrasted sharply with the complex, labor-intensive production of the German Tiger and Panther tanks, which were often delayed and prone to mechanical breakdowns due to resource scarcity and over-engineering. The crews who survived their encounters with the M4A3E2 had to quickly develop new, ad hoc targeting priorities. They learned, through bloody experience, that against this particular, heavier variant, their only reliable targets were the tracks, the turret ring, or the relatively thinner side armor. However, a crew trained for 2 years to aim for the center of the frontal mass had to fight instinct to survive the encounter. This shift in targeting doctrine was often passed on by word of mouth rather than official training, leading to inconsistent and often desperate battlefield execution. The legacy of the M4A3E2 jumbo, despite its rarity, became disproportionately large. It succeeded not just in protecting its own crews, but in changing the entire tactical battlefield dynamic by introducing uncertainty. The German 80 mm crews were forced to treat every single Sherman silhouette as a potential jumbo threat, forcing them to hold fire for closer ranges or seek flanks, thus reducing the effective range and lethality of their most feared weapon against the Allied armor formations as a whole. The jumbo effectively complicated the life of every German anti-tank gunner on the Western Front. In conclusion, the German 80 mm crew's ignorance of the M4A3E2 Jumbo's 7 inches of effective frontal armor was a devastating confluence of factors. The Allies' effective operational security, the low production number of the tank, the crucial failure of German intelligence to filter down critical information, and the inherent shock of witnessing the technological failure of their most vaunted weapon against a perceived weaker adversary. The Jumbo stands as a powerful symbol of how a small, specialized unit, when used strategically, can create disproportionate tactical confusion and contribute significantly to the broader collapse of an enemy's will and confidence on the battlefield.